Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Do you like to eat pancakes? Of course you do. And if you eat pancakes, you need syrup, right? You need syrup on your pancakes. It's that brown, thick liquid that's very sweet that makes your pancakes really delicious. Well, in this lesson, we're going to learn where syrup comes from. This book is titled The Maple Harvest. Two words here, maple. What is maple? Maple is a kind of tree. These trees are maple trees. So we're going to talk about these trees in this book. We're going to learn more about these trees. Now we also have this word, harvest. Harvest. Harvest means when you take some food from plants that you grow. Trees are plants, right? Rice is a plant. Corn is a plant. So in the fall, usually farmers will go into their fields and take the food from the plants. They'll take the rice, or they'll take the corn, or whatever food it is. They'll harvest the food. So the maple harvest, they're taking food from the trees. That's where syrup comes from. So when we learn about this subject, these are the contents. This is the table of contents. And this is what we're going to learn in this lesson. Let's go over it together. Times for the maple harvest. Remember, I gave you the example. Farmers go into the field in the fall, in the autumn, to get the rice or to get the corn. But what about maple syrup? What about maple harvest? Well, there will be times. What time do they go? Do they go in the fall? Do they go in a different time of the year? We'll find out in this chapter on page 2. The next one is collecting the sap. Now here we have a word that you probably don't know, sap. Sap. If you look at a plant, any plant, and if it's a small plant, you can break it or break it, part of the plant off, you can see there's some kind of liquid or some kind of water inside. Yeah, it's some water, but there's also, it's like juice, right? Well, sap is a type of juice or water that is inside a tree, right? Now, don't do this, but if you did, if somebody cuts a tree, once you cut into the tree, you can see that it's kind of moist. There's a little bit of water in there. But don't do that just to see, because that's not good for the tree. But anyway, there's sap inside the tree. There's some kind of juice in the tree. Then we see the sugar house. That looks interesting. The sugar house. That's a house where they have sugar. We'll learn about that on page 6. Then we'll see how they make maple syrup. Of course, we can see it has something to do with the sap, the juice inside the maple tree. How do they make maple syrup? We'll find out on page 8. Then we'll have a fun chapter, time to eat, right? Time to eat. What can we eat with maple syrup? What can we use maple syrup to make? What kinds of food can we make with maple syrup? We'll find that out in this chapter on page 10. And then, of course, at the end of the book, we have our glossary, where we can review the important words we learned in this book. Okay, so let's begin. Let's go to Canada, because that is where many maple trees are. In fact, did you know this important fact down here? The maple leaf is on the Canadian flag. There are many, many maple trees in Canada. So many maple trees that they put the leaf, that's the leaf from the maple tree, is on the Canadian flag, because Canada has many, many, many maple trees. So there's many maple trees in Canada. It's a great place to make maple syrup. But when? When do they make the maple syrup? It's time for the maple harvest. Time. What time? It is the end of winter in Canada. The end of winter in Canada. So the end of winter means spring is coming soon. When is the end of winter? around the end of February or the beginning of March. But remember, Canada has a very long winter, so maybe it's in March sometime, maybe middle March or end of March. This family, these are the girls of the family. This family is going to a maple farm, right? A farm, of course, is where people grow food. This is a maple farm. They grow maple trees and they get the syrup from the maple trees at this farm. They will see how maple syrup is made. There's our word, one of our words right there. Syrup, of course you know syrup. I told you before at the beginning of this lesson, the syrup is the hot, sometimes hot, it's the thick, brown, sweet liquid that you pour onto your pancakes. It's thick, it's brown, and it's very, very sweet. It makes your pancakes taste very good. So they want to see how maple syrup is made. We'll go with them and we'll find out too, okay? Okay, maple syrup is made from sap. Now before, remember I told you, sap is the juice inside trees. We'll see how they get that juice out of the trees later on. The sap is harvested from sugar maple trees. This is a special type of tree. It's a sugar maple tree. It's a sweet tree. Can you imagine a tree of sugar? It's not that. That would be cool, huh? You go in the forest and you can lick the trees. Yeah. No, don't do that. They're not like that. They are sweet on the inside and you have to do many things to make it sweet. So don't lick the trees in Canada. But anyway, the sap is harvested. Remember that word I taught you? Harvested. It's when the farmer goes into the field and takes the food from the plants or whatever they're growing, right? So they harvest the food, they get the food from the plants. So the sap is harvested from sugar maple trees. Sugar maple trees grow well in Canada. That's what I said before. There are many, many maple trees in Canada, so many that they put the maple leaf on their flag. So they grow very well in Canada. It's the right conditions, right? There's lots of land, good air, the right temperatures. They apparently like cold temperatures because Canada is quite cold. Okay. Now, collecting the sap. How do they get the sap from the tree? Look at this picture. Do you see anything strange? We see a building, we see trees, and we see something strange. What are these? These are buckets. There's buckets hanging on the trees. Okay? That's a little strange, right? But these buckets are used to collect the sap. The sap goes into the bucket and the farmer can get the sap out of the bucket. Okay? So, sugar makers collect the sap. Sugar makers. Sugar makers are people. They are a certain type of farmer who collect the sap. We call them sugar makers. Okay, that's a special job title, right? Interesting job title. What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a sugar maker, right? Sounds interesting. Okay, sugar makers collect the sap. They make small holes in the trees. They make small holes. So they don't make a big hole in the tree. That's not good for the tree. Just a small hole. And you can see that they put these very small holes. And maybe this is an old hole right here. It's a very small hole that they drill or they put into the tree so the sap can come out. So they make small holes in the trees. They tie buckets to the trees. That's why these buckets are hanging on the trees. You have to tie them so they don't fall down. They tie buckets to the trees. When you tie something, you use wire or string or rope and you tie them. You tie your shoes, right? You tie two pieces of string or wire together so it holds together. The sap runs out the holes. So the sap runs out the holes, it fills the buckets. We can see here that the hole is here, and then you have this here. What is this? This is a sap tube. There's air inside, right? It's empty inside. So when the sap comes out, there's some room. It can go through the tube, right, here, and then it can go there and then into the buckets, okay? So the sap comes out of the tree and down the tube, and then it drops into the buckets, okay? So that is a sap tube. So it's you have to have a special tool to get the sap from the trees. Today, some sugar makers use tubes, not buckets. The tubes run from the trees to a big tank. So in this case, actually, they don't use the buckets, right? In this case, they probably just drill a hole in the tree and the sap runs out into the bucket. But other sugar makers today, they don't use the buckets. Some of them don't use the buckets. They use tubes. And these tubes run out here, and you can have a tube go very far, and you can have a big tank over here. A big tank. What's a tank? Well, if you think about your car needs gas. When you go to the gas station, the 주유소, you put gas into the tank. So the tank is a big, usually metal container. It can hold a lot of liquid, whether it's gas in your car or syrup from the trees. So the tubes run from the trees to a big tank. And the tank is collected there. And that's easier, right? Because if you use buckets, you have to get each bucket and pour it into a big tank. But if you got the tubes running to the tank already, that saves a lot of work. That's pretty smart. So the sugar makers in Canada are always using new technology to make their work easier for them. Okay, let's take a break here. We'll come back and we'll learn more about how maple syrup is made. Okay, welcome back. We're learning how maple syrup is made. And we learned that sugar makers, which are a special type of farmer, use maple trees, sugar maple trees, to get the sap, and they collect the sap in big tanks. Now, it's an interesting fact over here. Did you know forests of sugar maple trees are called sugar bushes? That's interesting. And we got to be careful there. First of all, we have this word forests. A forest is a group of many, many, many trees. A forest is a large area and there's many trees growing in that area. So that is a forest. Then we have this word over here, bush. Now, normally, usually, most of the time, a bush is a small plant. It's not a tree, it's smaller and it has lots of leaves, right? There are many bushes in the park, probably near your house. If you live in an apartment complex, in front of your apartment complex, you probably have lots of bushes. They're small plants. They're for decoration. They look good. That's the normal use for bush. But in this case, forests of sugar maple trees are called sugar bushes. So the whole forest, if there are many maple trees, sugar maple trees, only sugar maple trees, then you can call that whole area a sugar bush. But that's not normal, so don't get confused. Don't call a forest a bush because usually a bush is a small plant, okay? But this is a special case, right? This is a special word that people use in their job. And sometimes we find words like this. Some certain jobs, people who do those jobs, they'll use special words that are not normal words, that most people don't use and most people don't know. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you call a forest of sugar maple trees a bush. If I hear bush, I think it's a small tree, right? A small plant, like a tree, but it's a small plant, not a whole forest. Okay, so this is a special word that some people use in their job. So sometimes you hear these types of words and you learn them. Interesting. Let's continue with how to make syrup. Okay, so we talked about sugar makers. Now we have a sugar house. A house made of sugar? Sounds great. No, it's not a house made of sugar. I'm sorry. It's a house where the sugar is made or the syrup is made. Let's read. The family. Remember, the family in Canada went to a maple farm to see how maple syrup is made. Well, the family's not just looking, they're helping. right? They're doing some work also. Good family, right? The family help the sugar makers. They collect the full buckets, right? So in this case, they're still using the buckets. They're not using the big tank, they're using the buckets. And like I said before, taking each one of those buckets, that's a lot of hard work. They're heavy. So with many people, you can do the job quickly. Work as a team. Everybody takes the bucket, right? They collect the full buckets. They take them to the sugar house. And this is the sugar house here. And this man looks like he is the sugar maker, right? Where do sugar makers come from, right? It's kind of a special job. It's an interesting job. Where do they come from? How did this job get started? Well, the first sugar makers were Native Americans. Native Americans are also called Indians, right? They are the people who lived in America, North America, Central America, and South America before the Europeans, Christopher Columbus, came over and found the New World, the Americas, right? They are the Native Americans. They lived there before the Europeans came. They are the Native Americans. And they lived in Canada and America and Central America and South America for a very long time. They knew their world. They knew what trees were good to use. They knew how to farm plants in their home, in their area. So they were the first people to make syrup from maple trees. They found out how to make syrup. They were the first sugar makers. They called it Sinzibukwad. I don't know if my pronunciation is good because I don't speak this type of language, but they called it Sinzibukwad, okay? These are the first sugar makers. And look what they're doing. They have the tree here, looks like the maple tree, and they're cooking the sap, and they're making maple syrup from it. So it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting way to make sugar. I didn't know you could make sugar from a tree. Trees don't seem very sweet, right? Especially, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you lick a piece of wood, it's not sweet. Sometimes it's blech, and sometimes it can be dangerous, so be careful. But I wouldn't expect it to be sugar or sweet. But the Native Americans found out how to get sugar from these trees. So they were the first sugar makers. Very interesting. Okay, so making maple syrup. So how do they make something sweet from this tree? Well, it's very simple, really. Making maple syrup. The sap is boiled in the sugar house. That's it, boiled. They boil the sap. So they get the juice from the trees, right? And they put it in a pot and they have a fire underneath or some heat, and it gets so hot that the liquid starts to bubble, and that's boiling. Your mother probably boils water every day to make food. When you make ramen, right? You boil the water first. You put the water over heat, it bubbles, then you put the noodles and the spices in. So boiling is very easy to do. It's very common. The sap is boiled in the sugar house. It gets sweeter. It gets thicker. After a while, it turns into syrup. And that's it. Just boiling the sap makes it sweeter, makes it thicker, right? Thicker means, water is very thin, but syrup has some weight. It seems heavier. It's harder to flow, right? It's thicker. After a while, 조금 있다가, right? Or 나중에, it changes. Turns into something means it changes from one thing into another, right? A caterpillar turns into a butterfly. A baby turns into a child. A child turns into a teenager. A teenager turns into an adult. So when something changes from one thing to another, we say it turns into that thing. So the sap, it turns into syrup. The sap turns into syrup. And that's how syrup is made. It's pretty amazing, huh? Here they're looking at all the big tanks where it's being boiled. Here's the mom and the daughter, and they're looking at the sap as it's boiling. And after it's boiled, right, they get little cups. And look at their tongue. Look at her tongue, right? She's going, because it's very sweet, right? It's also a little sticky. So if you get it on your mouth, you have to lick it off, right? Sweet and sticky, right? And they have it in their cups. They look very happy because it's very sweet. It's almost like sugar, really. Okay? And that is how maple syrup is made. Well, let's take a break here. We'll come back and we'll learn how to use maple syrup, right? We already know you pour it on pancakes, but is there anything else we can do with it? Well, we'll learn about that in the next part of the lesson. See you then. Hello, kids. Welcome back. We're studying about maple syrup and especially how maple syrup is made. Remember our story, we have our family that goes to Canada at the end of winter to see how maple syrup is made. And they also get to taste it, right? So let's read, let's continue here. The children taste the sap. Remember, the sap is the juice from the trees. They taste it from the bucket. Remember, the sap comes out of the tree, it goes into the bucket. Then they taste the sap after it boils. So it's like they're comparing. It tastes different from the tree, then after it boils, it tastes different there too. Think about that. Drinking the sap, they taste it. They don't drink it, they just taste it, just a little bit. They taste it from the tree. How do you think that tastes? Do you think it tastes sweet? Do you think it's good? I don't think so. I don't think the sap from the tree tastes good. But after it boils, it changes taste. Remember over here, we said it gets sweeter. It gets sweeter. So after it boils, it gets sweeter. So it probably tastes better after it boils. And we can see one of the daughters has just taken some syrup. She probably tasted it after it boiled, and it's pretty good, right? Now, remember when I was talking about boiling? Boiling. When you boil water, if you boil water for a long time, what happens? All the water goes away. So when you boil something, the amount of liquid gets smaller. So here we have an interesting fact. Did you know? Did you know it takes about 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup? So think about that. Probably gallons don't mean much to you. But think of a gallon. A gallon is about, it's a little more than, well, it's a little less than, sorry, it's a little less than 4 liters. 4 liters of water. 4 liters, right? I'll write it out. Liters. 4 liters. About equal. About equal. 1 gallon. And I'll just put G. 1 gallon. So 4 liters. If you think 4 bottles of water that you get at the supermarket, right? If it's 1 liter bottle, 4 of those is 1 gallon. 40 gallons, they boil 40 gallons of tree sap to get only 1 gallon of syrup. That's a lot of sap. That means you need a lot of sap. You need many, many, many buckets of sap just to make 1 gallon of syrup, 4 liters of syrup. Wow, that's a lot of sap, right? So you think about it, it boils, and as something boils, it gets smaller and smaller, but it also becomes thicker. If there's something inside it, it's not just water. All the solid parts of the sap, they don't go away. They get smaller and smaller in that liquid, and they get more and more. They get thicker and thicker, and that's why syrup is thick. But at the same time, it also gets sweet, and it's delicious afterwards, okay? So, it's time to eat the syrup, right? It's time to have fun and make some interesting things with the syrup because you've boiled it down. Now you've got a sweet mixture. You have a sweet syrup left. What can we do with it? Well, At the end of the day, everyone has supper. So the family who went to the maple farm and the sugar makers, they all get together and they have supper. There are pancakes. Pancakes for supper? Sure, why not? Usually we think about pancakes for breakfast, but why not eat pancakes for supper? Why not? It's not a bad habit. It's not a bad thing to do. So they have pancakes at supper. They also have beans, eggs, and ham. Really sounds like breakfast, right? Especially eggs and ham are usually eaten for breakfast. Many Americans eat eggs and ham for breakfast, and of course pancakes, but they're having it for supper, right? Why not? They're also having beans. Best of all, the best thing, the greatest thing is there is plenty of maple syrup. Of course, they have lots and lots of maple syrup to put on the pancakes. So what can they use syrup for, right? They have pancakes with maple syrup. Wow, this is a tall stack of pancakes. When you have pancakes like that, we call it a stack. Stack, S-T-A-C-K, a stack of pancakes. Sometimes we can have a short stack or you can have a tall stack. And this is a tall stack of pancakes. Can you eat that many pancakes? That's a lot of pancakes, right? But you pour syrup over them to make them sweeter. Okay, and you also have some butter. This is butter. But what else can you use maple syrup for? Most people use it on their pancakes, but did you know you can also make fudge from maple syrup? And this is fudge. It's like a candy. It's soft. You may have had a brownie before. A brownie is like a very thick cake. And fudge is even thicker than a brownie. And it's very sweet. And you can make chocolate fudge, but you can also make maple fudge. And it tastes like maple syrup, but it's very thick and it's very sweet. Don't eat too much. You'll get sick. It's too sweet, but it's very good. It's mashisoyo. And you can also make maple muffins. You know muffin, right? Muffin is like a little cupcake or a little cake, right? But you can make maple muffins. You use maple syrup to make the muffins. It tastes like maple syrup. Did you know maple syrup is used in many recipes to make sweet treats? These are just two examples, maple fudge and maple muffins. And you see her, she's having supper, she's having dinner, and this is her dinner. She has beans, she has bread, maybe it's maple bread, and she has something over here, I'm not sure what that is, but she's pouring maple syrup onto it. And that looks like an interesting dinner, right? Okay, so that's a very good way to have dinner. It's a time to eat the maple syrup that they made. And of course, maple syrup is made for many different reasons. Okay, let's finish up with the glossary. Let's review the words that we learned as we read this book. The first word, in fact, it was in the title. The first word that we saw was harvest. Harvest, remember, means to collect a crop. It's when farmers go into the field and they get the food from the plants. They're collecting a crop. A crop is a type of food. Remember, I gave you the examples, rice or corn. Rice is a crop. Corn is a crop. Maple sap, syrup, is a crop. Okay? Anything that farmers grow is a crop. And at harvest time, they go and they get it. They collect it. Sap, remember, sap is the sticky liquid inside tree trunks and branches. In fact, most plants, if you break the plant or you cut the plant, you will see some type of liquid inside, and that's sap. Okay? It's sticky. It means it sticks together. And it's inside the tree trunks, but it's also in the tree branches. Okay? A sugar house. Sounds sweet, sounds great. But remember, sugar house is just a building where maple sap is boiled. It's like a factory, but it's just a special factory for maple, sugar maple sap. They take the sap, and remember, it takes a lot of sap to make just a little bit of syrup. So they have to boil it down. It takes a long time, but when they boil it down, they have a little bit of syrup left. And they do that where? In the sugar house. Who does that? Who is the expert that does this and sees everything and knows how to boil and knows when to start, knows the temperature, knows when to stop? Who is that person? That person is the sugar maker. He's the person who collects maple sap and makes syrup. Do you remember who were the first sugar makers? Do you remember? That's right, Native Americans. Native Americans knew their land very well, and they found out how to make sweet syrup from maple trees. Okay, finally we have syrup, and we know that word. We've used it many times before already. Syrup is a golden sweet liquid made from sugar maple tree sap. Sugar maple tree sap. So remember, this is the noun, these are the adjectives. Sugar maple tree, and this is also a noun now because it's sugar maple tree sap. So this becomes our new noun, and these are all adjectives. Sugar maple tree sap. What kind of sap? Sugar maple tree sap. Okay? That's a lot of adjectives. We put them all together in front of the noun. But anyway, we know syrup. Syrup is golden. It has a gold color. If you look at it, especially in light, when it's very light behind it, it looks golden. And it looks brown too. It's depending on the type of syrup. But it's very sweet, and remember, it's also sticky, and it's very good on pancakes. Okay? So this lesson was very interesting. Now you know where the syrup comes from that you pour on your pancakes to have breakfast. And remember, it's not just for breakfast. You can also have it for supper. Okay? Well, if you're like me, you're getting hungry for some maple syrup and pancakes. I think I'm going to go home now and have some. I hope you do too. Well, you're probably already at home. Maybe you can ask your mom to make pancakes and maple syrup. Maybe. But anyway, we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. I hope you've learned a lot. Goodbye.